General Doyen stood on the command deck of the starship Crimson Dawn. His black uniform carried the silver marks of the Kyril Empire. Around his waist hung a golden belt with strange symbols that glowed softly in the dim light. This belt was special. It connected his mind to the most powerful creature in the entire Imperial fleet. Outside the massive windows of the ship, space stretched endlessly. Stars dotted the darkness like tiny diamonds, but Doyen was not looking at the stars. He was looking at something much bigger and more terrifying. Floating beside the warship was Varathix, the ancient dragon. Varathix was not like the dragons from old Earth stories. This dragon was bigger than 10 battleships combined. His scales were deep purple and black, each one as large as a house. They shimmered with an otherworldly glow that seemed to bend light itself. His wings were folded against his massive body, but when spread they could block out entire suns. His eyes burned with blue fire, cold and empty, controlled by the collar around his thick neck. The collar was made of dark metal that pulsed with red light. Inside the metal were crystals that connected directly to the dragon's brain. Through these crystals, through the belt at his waist, Doyen controlled every thought and action of the mighty beast. It was a technology the Kyril Empire had perfected over thousands of years. They had found these cosmic dragons drifting through space, powerful and ancient, and they had enslaved them all. Doyen had commanded Varathix for 15 years. Together they had destroyed rebellions on 7 worlds. They had burned cities to ash and melted mountains to glass. The Empire rewarded Doyen with medals and honors. Other generals respected him. Young soldiers dreamed of being like him. He was the perfect example of imperial power and control. But today was different. Today they were arriving at a new world, a small blue planet that the Empire had marked for conquest. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants, primitive creatures who had barely begun to explore their own star system. Commander Jiwan approached Doyen on the deck. She was shorter than him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her dragon Shadowfang was smaller than Varathix but just as deadly. Jiwan had been Doyen's friend since military academy. They had trained together, fought together, and risen through the ranks together. "The planet looks weak," Jiwan said, studying the blue sphere on the view screen. "Their technology is centuries behind ours. This should be quick." Doyen nodded slowly. He had read the intelligence reports. The humans had primitive weapons, slow ships, and divided nations that fought among themselves. They would stand no chance against the Empire's might, against dragons that breathed plasma fire and could survive in the vacuum of space. Captain Minho entered the command deck carrying data tablets. He was the youngest of the 3 commanders, but his tactical mind was sharp. His dragon, Thunderclaw, specialized in lightning attacks that could disable entire power grids. "The first wave is ready," Minho reported. "We have 50 dragons positioned in orbit. Ground forces are prepared to deploy once we establish air superiority. The humans have launched some fighter craft, but they are no threat." Doyen looked out at Varathix again. Through their mental link, he could feel the dragon's power, barely contained, waiting to be unleashed. The link was always there, a constant presence in his mind. It felt natural now after so many years. He could sense Varathix's strength, his hunger for battle, his readiness to obey every command. Or was it really hunger for battle? Sometimes in quiet moments Doyen wondered, but he pushed those thoughts away. The dragons were weapons, tools of the Empire. That was all they needed to be. "Begin the assault," Doyen ordered. The fleet moved forward. 50 dragons detached from their command ships and flew toward Earth. They were magnificent and terrible, ancient beings of cosmic power reduced to living weapons. Their scales reflected the light of Earth's sun as they descended through the atmosphere. Doyen closed his eyes and synced deeper with Varathix. Through the dragon's senses, he could see the planet growing larger. He could feel the air rushing past scales, the heat building as they entered the atmosphere. He could taste the fear rising from the cities below as people looked up and saw death descending from the sky. The human military tried to fight back. Fighter jets launched missiles that exploded harmlessly against dragon scales. Anti-aircraft weapons fired streams of bullets that bounced off like rain. One brave pilot flew his jet directly at Varathix, firing everything he had. Doyen barely needed to think. Varathix opened his massive jaws and breathed a stream of blue-white plasma that turned the jet to vapor in an instant. It was always like this. The Empire's enemies always tried to resist at first. They always failed. It was the natural order of the universe. The strong conquered the weak. The advanced dominated the primitive. The Chiral Empire had been doing this for 10,000 years. Doyen opened his eyes. On the view screens, he watched as dragons began their systematic destruction of human military installations. Bases burned, ships sank, defensive positions crumbled. It was efficient, professional, and completely one-sided. We should send ground forces to secure the major cities, Jiwan suggested. Standard occupation protocol. Minho agreed. The humans are already broadcasting surrender offers from several governments. This will be over in days, not weeks. But something felt wrong to Doyen. He could not explain it. The battle was going exactly as planned. Victory was certain, yet a strange feeling grew in his chest, a sense that something was about to change. He had learned to trust these feelings over his years of command. They had saved his life more than once. Through his link with Vorathix, he sensed something too. A flicker. A hesitation. It was so brief he almost missed it. Dragons did not hesitate. The collars made sure of that. But for just a fraction of a second, Vorathix had felt something other than obedience. Doyen pushed the thought away. He had a planet to conquer. The Chiral Empire was expanding as it always did. As it always would. He was General Doyen, commander of the mightiest dragon in existence. And nothing would change that. He did not know that far below, in a refugee camp on the outskirts of a burning city, a small girl named Hana was looking up at the sky. She was watching Vorathix circle overhead, and she was remembering words her grandmother had taught her before she died, strange words in a language that should not exist anymore, words that would change everything. The refugee camp was a mess of tents and frightened people. Smoke rose from the nearby city, turning the afternoon sky gray and orange. Hana sat on a blanket outside a torn tent, her small hands clutching a worn notebook. She was 8 years old, with dark hair and eyes that had seen too much death in the past 3 days. Her mother was gone. Her father was gone. Her older brother Tae-hyun had disappeared when their building collapsed during the first dragon attack. Only Hana remained, alone among thousands of other survivors who had fled the burning city. She held the notebook because it was the only thing she had left from her grandmother. Grandmother had died 2 years ago, but she had been special. She knew things that others did not. She collected old stories in ancient languages that scholars said were meaningless. In the notebook were words written in grandmother's careful handwriting. Strange words that looked like no language Hana had ever seen in school. Before she died, grandmother had made Hana memorize some of the words. She said they were important. She said they were from a time before time, from when the stars were young. Hana did not understand, but she loved her grandmother, so she learned the words. She practiced them until she could say them perfectly, even though she did not know what they meant. Now, sitting in the refugee camp with the world ending around her, Hana whispered those words to herself. They brought her comfort somehow. They made her feel less alone. Then she heard the roar. It was different from the explosions and screams that had filled the air for days. This was deeper, older, a sound that shook the ground and made her bones vibrate. Hana looked up and saw him. The biggest dragon she had seen yet. His scales were dark purple and black, and he moved through the sky like a shadow given form. People in the camp started screaming and running. But Hana did not run. She stood up slowly, the notebook falling from her hands. She stared at the dragon as he circled lower, coming toward the camp. Something inside her recognized him, though she did not know how or why. Vorathix descended with controlled power. Each beat of his massive wings sent dust and debris flying. He landed on the empty field next to the camp with a sound like thunder. The ground cracked under his weight. His blue eyes swept across the fleeing humans with cold indifference. On the command deck of the Crimson Dawn, General Doyen watched through Vorathix's eyes. He had ordered this demonstration. The humans needed to see that resistance was pointless. A show of force at the refugee camps would break their spirit completely. He prepared to give the command to burn the camp to ash. But then he saw the girl. She was small and thin, standing alone while everyone else fled. She was looking directly at Vorathix with no fear in her eyes. Just curiosity and something else, recognition. It made no sense. She should be terrified. She should be running for her life. Hana walked forward. One step, then another. Adults tried to grab her and pull her back, but she slipped away from their hands. She walked across the cracked ground toward the dragon that could destroy her with a breath. toward a creature from beyond the stars that had helped destroy her world. Doyen sent a command through the link. Varathix's jaws began to open. Blue light gathered in his throat as plasma fire built up. The child would be vapor in seconds. It was mercy, really. Quick and painless compared to what would come when the Empire began its full occupation. But Varathix did not fire. The plasma faded. The dragon's jaws closed. Through their link, Doyen felt confusion, hesitation, resistance. Impossible. The collar controlled everything. Dragons could not refuse commands. Yet Varathix had stopped. Hana stopped a few meters from Varathix's massive head. She tilted her head to one side, studying the dragon like he was a puzzle to solve. Then she raised her small hand toward him, palm open, in a gesture of greeting, and she spoke. The words that came from her mouth were not Korean. They were not English or any language spoken on Earth for millions of years. They were old beyond measure, formed in ways that human vocal cords should not be able to produce. Yet Hana spoke them perfectly as her grandmother had taught her. On the command deck, alarms started blaring. Doyen grabbed the railing as pain shot through his head. The link with Varathix was flickering, static filling their connection. The belt at his waist sparked and burned hot against his skin. "What is happening?" Jiwan shouted, rushing to his side. Doyen could not answer. He was too focused on trying to maintain control over Varathix. But it was like trying to hold water in his hands. The dragon's mind was slipping away from him, breaking free of bonds that had held for 15 years. Varathix's eyes changed. The cold blue fire flickered and dimmed. For the first time in centuries, the dragon was truly seeing, not through the filter of the collar's control, but with his own consciousness awakening. He looked at the small human child speaking words he had not heard since before the Empire captured him. She was speaking Draconic, the true language, the language of his people from before they were enslaved, from when they flew free through the cosmos and helped young civilizations grow. How did this primitive child know the true speech? Hana spoke again, and this time Varathix understood the meaning. She was not commanding him. She was asking his name. His real name, not the designation the Empire had given him. She was treating him like a person, not a weapon. The collar around his neck sparked violently. Red lightning crawled across its surface. The crystals inside were overloading, unable to handle the conflict between the control signals and the dragon's awakening will. Smoke began to pour from the metal joints. Doyen felt it all through the link. He felt Varathix's mind expanding, memories flooding back, rage and sorrow mixing together in a storm of emotion. He felt the dragon remembering who he used to be, what he had lost, what had been taken from him. "No," Doyen whispered. "This cannot happen," but it was happening. Hana spoke a third time, and her words were gentle and sad. She was saying she was sorry. Sorry for what had been done to him. Sorry for his pain. She offered her hand again, not as a master to a slave, but as one living being to another. Varathix lowered his massive head toward her tiny hand. His eyes, no longer cold, no longer empty, looked at the child with recognition that spanned across time itself. And somewhere deep in his ancient mind, something clicked into place. She was a speaker, the first he had encountered in millions of years. Her species had been thought extinct, scattered and lost to time. But here she was, a little girl who carried in her voice the power to speak to dragons as equals, the power to free them. The collar exploded. Metal and crystal fragments scattered across the field. The psychic connection between Doyen and Varathix snapped like a broken cable. Doyen screamed and collapsed on the command deck, blood running from his nose. The last thing he felt through the dying link was not anger or hatred. It was freedom. Varathix opened his eyes fully for the first time in 300 years. The world looked different now. Colors were brighter. Sounds were clearer. He could think his own thoughts, feel his own feelings. The fog that had covered his mind since the day of his capture was gone. He looked at the small human girl standing before him. Hana. She had told him her name in the true speech. She stood there with her hand still extended, waiting patiently, trusting that he would not harm her. Such trust from a creature he had helped to terrorize. It broke something inside him that had been frozen for centuries. Tears formed in Varathix's ancient eyes. They were not like human tears. They were liquid fire, drops of plasma that fell from his face and burned small holes in the ground where they landed. He had forgotten he could cry. The collar had not allowed such displays of emotion. Memories flooded back. He remembered his homeworld, a place of crystal mountains and singing winds. He remembered flying with his clan through nebulas and star clusters, teaching young species about the universe, sharing knowledge freely. He remembered the day the Karel Empire's ships arrived with their weapons and their collars. He remembered his brothers and sisters falling one by one, enslaved and broken. He remembered 300 years of being a weapon, 300 years of burning worlds, 300 years of killing on command while his true self screamed silently inside a prison of psychic control. All the death, all the destruction, all the civilizations he had helped destroy. "Forgive me," he spoke in the ancient language, his voice like distant thunder. His words came out as sounds that no human should understand, yet Hana seemed to grasp their meaning. "I am so sorry, little one, for what I have done to your people, for all that I have done." Hana lowered her hand and stepped closer. She was not afraid of the tears of fire or the massive creature before her. She reached up and placed her small palm against Varathix's scaled snout. Her hand was tiny against his face, barely covering a single scale. "You were not free," she said in Draconic, the words coming naturally to her now. "You were a prisoner. The fault is not yours." "How do you know the old speech?" Varathix asked. "Your people are young. You have barely reached for the stars. How do you carry the voice of the speakers?" Hana did not know how to answer. She only knew what her grandmother had taught her. The words had been passed down through her family for generations, though the meaning had been forgotten. Only the sounds remained, preserved perfectly across thousands of years. "My grandmother knew," Hana said simply. "She taught me." She said these words were important. Across the field, the refugees who had been fleeing began to slow down and stop. They turned back, watching the impossible scene. The monster dragon that should have killed them all was crying. A little girl was touching its face, and they seemed to be communicating somehow, though the sounds coming from both of them made no sense. On the crimson dawn, chaos filled the command deck. Doyen was on his knees, holding his head. Blood had stopped flowing from his nose, but his brain felt like it was on fire. The sudden breaking of the psychic link had nearly killed him. Medical teams rushed to help him, but Doyen pushed them away. He struggled to his feet and looked at the view screen showing Varathix on the ground. The dragon was free, truly free, and Doyen could feel in his gut that everything was about to change. Commander Jiwan stood beside him, her face pale. Her own link to Shadowfang was flickering strangely. "Something is wrong," she said. "I can feel Shadowfang trying to resist. The collar is holding, but barely." Captain Minho's voice came over the communication system, panicked and confused. "My dragon is acting strange too. All dragons are showing signs of stress." "What happened down there?" Doyen knew what was happening. Somehow that child's voice had done more than just free Varathix. It had awakened something in all the dragons. Like a signal spreading through a network, her words were reaching them all. Back on the ground, Varathix raised his great head and let out a roar. But this was not a roar of aggression or conquest. This was a call, a message sent through frequencies that only dragons could fully hear. It carried across the planet, up into space, reaching every enslaved dragon in the Imperial fleet. The message was simple. They could be free. The collars could be broken. The speakers had returned. One by one, the other dragons began to respond. Across the battlefield, collars started to spark and smoke. Some dragons shook their heads violently, trying to break free. Others went still, their minds pushing back against the psychic control for the first time in their enslaved lives. Shadowfang's collar exploded next. Jiwan screamed on the command deck as her link snapped. She collapsed but remained conscious, staring at the screens in horror and disbelief. Her dragon, her weapon, her tool of conquest was no longer hers to command. Then Thunderclaw's collar failed. Then a dozen more. The effect was spreading like wildfire through the fleet. Centuries of Imperial technology and psychic control were crumbling in minutes because one small girl had spoken words that should not exist anymore. Hana felt it too. She did not understand the technology or the psychic links, but she could sense the change happening. Through her connection to Varathix, she felt other minds awakening, other dragons remembering themselves, other prisoners breaking free. "What do we do?" she asked Varathix. "What happens now?" The great dragon looked down at her. His eyes were different now, warm and intelligent, filled with purpose instead of empty obedience. "Now we remember who we were," he said. "We remember what we were meant to be, and we stop this empire from hurting anyone else." "But you will not hurt people," Hana said. Promise me you will not hurt innocent people like the Empire hurt you. Varathix lowered his head again so they were eye to eye. I promise, little speaker. We will defend, not destroy. We will protect, not conquer. We will be what we were always meant to be. Guardians, not weapons. More dragons landed around the refugee camp. Their collars were broken or smoking. Their eyes were clear and aware. They formed a circle around Hana and Varathix, and one by one, they bowed their great heads to the small human girl who had freed them. In orbit, the Crimson Dawn shook as Varathix detached himself from the ship's docking clamps. Alarms blared throughout the fleet. Imperial commanders shouted orders that no longer worked. Generals demanded explanations that no one could give, and Doyun stood in the middle of it all, watching his world crumble. He looked at Jiwon and Minho, both of them struggling to understand what was happening. They had been soldiers of the Empire their entire lives. They had believed in its power, its right to rule, its destiny to control the galaxy. Now a child had destroyed that belief with nothing but her voice. Doyun made a decision then. It was not the decision of a loyal general or a proud warrior. It was the decision of someone who had just seen the truth behind 15 years of lies. He walked to the communication console and opened a channel to all ships in the fleet. All forces, he said, his voice steady despite everything. Stand down. Do not attack the freed dragons. I repeat, stand down. Jiwon looked at him with shock. Doyun, what are you doing? That is treason. Yes, he said quietly. I know, but it is also the right thing to do. The rebellion spread through the Imperial fleet like a virus. Within hours, nearly every dragon had broken free or was actively fighting their caller's control. The Kyril Empire, which had conquered hundreds of worlds over 10,000 years, was falling apart. Some Imperial commanders tried to fight back. They ordered their soldiers to attack the freed dragons with ship weapons. A few actually fired, plasma cannons and missiles streaking through space toward the creatures that had once been their greatest weapons. But the dragons were too powerful, too fast, and now they fought with purpose instead of forced obedience. Varathix led the freed dragons in a coordinated defense. They did not destroy the Imperial ships. Instead, they disabled them, using precise strikes to take out weapons and engines while leaving life support intact. They showed mercy that the Empire had never shown to them. They proved that Hana's words had changed more than just their freedom. It had changed their souls. On Earth below, the human military watched in confusion and hope. The dragons that had been burning their cities were now fighting each other. The invasion force was tearing itself apart. Some generals wanted to take advantage, to attack while the Empire was weak, but others argued for waiting, for trying to understand what was happening. Doyun commandeered a shuttle and flew down to the planet's surface. Jiwon and Minho went with him, though they were not sure why. They should have arrested him for treason. They should have taken command of the fleet and tried to restore order. But something had changed in them too. Seeing their dragons break free, feeling that moment of liberation through the psychic link before it snapped, had opened their eyes. They had been slavers, torturers. They had taken sentient beings and turned them into weapons. The Empire had taught them that this was right, that this was necessary, that this was the natural order. But watching Varathix cry tears of fire had shown them the truth. They had been wrong, terribly, completely wrong. The shuttle landed near the refugee camp. Doyun stepped out in his black uniform with its Imperial insignia. The refugees saw him and some ran. Others grabbed makeshift weapons. To them he was the enemy, the commander who had brought death from the sky. But then Varathix moved between them, his massive body shielding Doyun from the angry crowd. The dragon spoke in a rumbling voice that carried across the field. This one is under my protection, Varathix said.
He has chosen to help us.
He deserves a chance. Hana pushed through the crowd. She had been sitting with some of the other children, trying to explain what had happened, though she did not fully understand it herself. She stopped in front of Doyun and looked up at him with those dark, knowing eyes. You controlled Varathix, she said. It was not a question. Doyun knelt down to her level. Yes, he said, his voice filled with shame. For 15 years I commanded him. I thought I was a great warrior. I thought I was serving a noble cause. I was blind to what I was really doing. You hurt him, Hana said. You hurt all of them. Yes, Doyun said, and a single tear rolled down his face. I did, and I can never undo that. But I want to make it right. I want to help stop the Empire. I want to free the dragons who are still enslaved across the galaxy. Hana studied him for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. Teach me about the Empire, she said. Teach me how their technology works. If I am going to free more dragons, I need to understand how they were captured in the first place. Doyen took her small hand in his. Behind him, Jiwon and Minho stepped forward and bowed to the little girl. We will help too, Jiwon said. We know the Empire's strategies, their weapons, their weaknesses. We will share everything we know. Over the next few days, an alliance formed that should have been impossible. Former Imperial commanders worked alongside human resistance fighters. Freed dragons coordinated with Earth's military forces. And at the center of it all was Hana, a small child who somehow held the key to ending the Empire's reign. Scientist Bora, a researcher from the orbital resistance stations, came down to meet Hana. She brought equipment to study the girl's voice, to understand how she could speak Draconic. The results were shocking. Hana's DNA contained markers that should not exist in modern humans, genetic sequences that were millions of years old, preserved perfectly through countless generations. She is not just speaking an ancient language, Bora explained to the gathered leaders. Her genetic code allows her to produce sounds that normal human vocal cords cannot make. She is genetically connected to the dragon somehow, to a species that existed long before humanity as we know it. Dr. Yuna from the Korean resistance joined the research. She was a historian who had studied ancient myths and legends. When she heard about Hana's abilities, she brought old texts that her university had preserved. Stories about the speakers, beings who could communicate with all living things, who brought peace and understanding to the young galaxy. According to these myths, Yuna explained, the speakers were the first intelligent species to evolve after the universe became capable of supporting complex life. They spread across the cosmos, teaching younger species, helping them develop, sharing knowledge freely, but then they disappeared. Every record says they simply vanished millions of years ago. Vorathix listened to all this with ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. He knew more than the humans realized. He had been alive when the speakers were still remembered. When Hana asked him to tell her the truth, he did not hesitate. The speakers did not disappear, Vorathix said. They changed. They evolved. They spread themselves across countless worlds, letting their genetics mix with local species. They gave up their power willingly, believing that if it was distributed widely enough, it could never be lost completely. Your species, humans, are their descendants. You carry their gift in your blood, though most of you have forgotten how to use it. Hana absorbed this information with the strange calmness of a child who did not fully grasp how important it was. So I can free all the dragons, she asked. Not alone, Vorathix said gently. Your voice is powerful, but the Empire has thousands of enslaved dragons across hundreds of systems. We need to find others like you. Other humans who carry the speaker gene and can learn the true speech. Bora and Yuna worked together to develop a genetic test. Within weeks, they had identified 50 more humans with the speaker markers. Most were scattered across Earth, normal people living normal lives, unaware of what they carried inside them. But when they were brought together and taught the ancient words, they learned quickly. The language was in their DNA, waiting to be awakened. Training camps were set up. Human speakers learned from the freed dragons about their history, their culture, their true names. And the dragons, in turn, learned about humanity, about their resilience, their creativity, their capacity for change and growth. Doyen watched it all with mixed emotions. He was helping to destroy the empire he had served his entire life. He was training the very forces that would tear down everything he had once believed in, but he also felt something he had not experienced in years. He felt hope. He felt like he was finally doing something right. Minho took charge of military strategy. He knew the Empire's tactics better than anyone, and he used that knowledge to plan how to free the remaining dragons with minimal casualties. Jiwon coordinated with Earth's governments, convincing them to join the cause, to send their ships and soldiers not for conquest but for liberation. The first liberation mission launched 3 months after Hana freed Vorathix. A combined force of freed dragons, human ships, and speaker teams attacked an Imperial supply depot in a neighboring system. The mission was a complete success. 20 more dragons were freed, and the depot was destroyed without a single civilian casualty. News of the victory spread quickly. Other enslaved species began to rebel against the Empire. Pirates and outlaws who had avoided Imperial space suddenly became allies. A network of resistance cells formed across the galaxy, all coordinating their efforts, all working toward the same goal. The Kirel Empire tried to respond. They sent their remaining loyal forces to crush the rebellions. They developed new collar designs that were supposed to be immune to the speaker's voice. They executed commanders who had turned traitor, but it was too late. The balance of power had shifted. The Empire's foundation had been built on enslaved dragons, and without them, it was nothing but a house of cards waiting to collapse. And at the center of its destruction was a small girl who had simply spoken the truth to a crying dragon. The war lasted 3 years. It was not the quick collapse that many had hoped for. The Kirel Empire was old and vast, with resources spread across thousands of systems. Even without their dragons, they had weapons and armies and technology that most species could only dream of. But they were fighting a losing battle, and deep down everyone knew it. Hana grew during those years. She went from a frightened child in a refugee camp to a symbol of hope for billions. She traveled from system to system with Varathics at her side, speaking to enslaved dragons and breaking their chains. She learned combat tactics from Doyen, medical knowledge from Bora, history from Yuna. She remained gentle and kind, but she also became strong in ways that had nothing to do with power or violence. Varathics never left her side. He had appointed himself her guardian and friend. Other dragons called him the First Freed, a title of great honor among his kind. But Varathics cared little for titles. He cared about protecting the small human who had given him back his life. The final battle took place above the Kirel homeworld. It was a planet of towering cities and artificial suns, the center of imperial power for millennia. The combined fleet of freed dragons, human ships, and allied forces gathered in orbit. They numbered in the thousands, a force that would have been impossible to assemble just 3 years earlier. The Empire's defense fleet was smaller than expected. Many of their ships had defected or been destroyed in earlier battles. The remaining forces were loyal but outnumbered. They knew they could not win, but they fought anyway, believing in the Empire even as it crumbled around them. Doyen commanded a wing of the Allied fleet. It felt strange to be fighting against ships that looked just like the ones he had once served on. He recognized some of the commanders on the other side, people he had trained with, fought alongside. But they had made their choice and he had made his. The universe was changing, and those who could not change with it would be left behind. Jiwan led the ground assault teams. Her forces landed on the planet's surface to secure key government buildings. She moved through the imperial palace that she had visited many times to receive honors and medals. Now she was there to tear it all down. The irony was not lost on her. Minho coordinated the freed dragons. They flew in formations that would have been impossible when they were enslaved, communicating through their ancient language, working as true partners instead of controlled weapons. They were magnificent to watch, beings of cosmic power finally using their strength for something they believed in. The battle was fierce, but short. Within hours, the Imperial Defense Fleet was defeated. Their ships retreated or surrendered. The planetary shields fell. Jiwan's ground forces secured the palace with minimal casualties. The Emperor himself, an ancient being who had ruled for 2,000 years, was found in his throne room refusing to flee. Hana insisted on being present when they met the Emperor. She arrived at the palace with Varathics, walking through halls that were designed to inspire fear and awe. Gold and crystal decorated every surface. Statues of conquered species lined the walls, frozen in positions of submission. It was a monument to cruelty and domination. The Emperor looked at her with eyes that had seen countless worlds burn. He was tall and thin, his skin pale gray, his features sharp and cold. He wore robes of deep purple, the color of imperial authority, but he looked tired, like a machine that had finally run out of power. "A human child," the Emperor said, his voice filled with bitter amusement. "We were defeated by a human child. The historians will have much to write about this day." Hana walked closer, showing no fear. "You were not defeated by me," she said simply. "You were defeated by everyone you hurt, by every dragon you enslaved, by every world you conquered. Your empire fell because it was built on pain and suffering. That cannot last forever." The Emperor laughed, a dry sound like wind through dead leaves. Such wisdom from one so young. "Tell me, child, what will you do now? Your alliance is held together by a common enemy. When that enemy is gone, how long before your friends turn on each other?" "We will do what you never did," Hana replied. "We will choose peace." We will choose cooperation. We will choose to be better. The emperor was taken into custody. He would stand trial for his crimes, though everyone knew no punishment could match what he had done. His empire was dissolved, his fleet surrendered, his systems freed. It was the end of an era that had lasted 10,000 years. The aftermath was complicated. Thousands of systems needed new governments. Billions of people needed help rebuilding. Resources had to be distributed. Treaties had to be written. Peace had to be maintained. It was harder than fighting the war had been, but they tried. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered on Earth for a great council. They created new laws based on freedom and equality instead of conquest and domination. They established the Guardian Fleet, made up of freed dragons who volunteered to protect younger civilizations from threats, but never to control them. Vorathix was offered the position of First Guardian, leader of all the free dragons. He accepted on one condition, that Hana would serve as the voice of the younger species, ensuring that the dragons never forgot the lessons they had learned, that they remained guardians and never became conquerors again. Hana was only 11 years old, but she agreed. She understood the weight of responsibility now. She had learned it through 3 years of war and struggle. She would spend the rest of her life working to build a better galaxy, speaking for those who had no voice, bridging the gap between species who had been enemies for generations. Doyen chose to stay on Earth. He helped train the new Guardian Fleet, teaching them tactics and strategy. But more importantly, he taught them restraint and mercy. He was living proof that people could change, that redemption was possible even for those who had done terrible things. Jiwan and Minho founded an academy where former Imperial soldiers and resistance fighters could learn to work together. They taught that strength came not from domination but from cooperation, that true power was not about control but about mutual respect. Bora and Yuna continued their research into the speakers. They discovered that nearly every intelligent species in the galaxy carried some trace of speaker genetics. The ancient beings had given their gift to everyone, spreading it as widely as possible. Humans just happened to have kept it more intact than most. But with work and training, other species could learn elements of the true speech too. 5 years after the war ended, Hana stood in the same refugee camp where everything had begun. It had been rebuilt into a memorial park. A statue stood at its center, showing a small girl reaching up to touch the face of a massive dragon. Thousands of people visited it every day, from dozens of different worlds. Vorathix landed beside her, careful not to damage the gardens that now covered what had once been scorched earth. He looked at the statue with amusement. "They made me smaller," he rumbled. Hana laughed. "They made me bigger. I was terrified that day." "You hid it well," Vorathix said. "You walked toward me like you had known me forever, like you trusted me completely." "I did not know what else to do," Hana admitted. "Grandmother's words were all I had left. So I used them and you freed a galaxy," Vorathix said softly. "With nothing but trust and compassion, you broke chains that had held for centuries. Your grandmother would be proud." They stood together in silence, watching the sunset. In the sky above, other dragons flew freely. No collars around their necks, no masters controlling their minds. They were what they were meant to be: guardians, friends, partners in building something new. The age of empire had ended. The age of cooperation had begun, and it had all started because a small human child had whispered a dragon's true name and reminded him of who he really was. That was humanity's true power, not weapons or technology or conquest, but the ability to see others as they truly were, to speak truth to power and to believe that change was possible even in the darkest moments. It was the legacy of the speakers carried forward by their descendants, awakened by tragedy and war. And across the galaxy, wherever dragons flew and humans lived, that power would continue to grow. Not as domination, but as connection. Not as control, but as understanding. The true speech had returned to the universe, and with it, hope for a future built on freedom instead of fear.